Welcome to the Courting Happiness podcast. This is a space where self-care becomes part of your day. A space where you learn evidence-based strategies to help your life, share it with those you love, and cultivate well-being at work. I'm your host, Dr. Courtney Alston. I'm a former news director, television reporter turned happiness scholar, TEDx speaker, and transformational trainer. I also understand hardships. While working my dream job in television, I lived a nightmare suddenly becoming a young widow after 86 days of marriage. I became committed to learning more about resilience, healing, and happiness. This is how I discovered my area of research, which is positive psychology. Now I'm living my calling of training individuals and organizations on happiness. And my new chapter begins with being happily engaged. The Courting and Courting Happiness is about a true courtship. I like to say commitment with happiness. The K in courting stands for the vulnerability of sharing my story, inspirational interviews with phenomenal people, the infusion of positive psychology, and so much more. You'll learn how to commit to your well-being one episode at a time. I hope you subscribe and share. So, are you ready? Let's get started. Welcome to episode 56. I'm Dr. Courtney Alston. Thank you so much for listening. I'm so happy that you're here. So I have a question for you. Are you ready to unlearn parenting? Yes. If you're ready to become a student of your child or children, well, I have the perfect guide that will help you do just that. Danielle Bettmann is a parenting coach and founder of Wholeheartedly. She's also the host of the Failing Motherhood podcast, and it is a must listen to. She will help you embrace messy, make meaning, and rewire your mindset. She will also teach you how to live happier as a parent, empower you to be more empathetic, and create you can't believe this, it's amazing, a family business plan. Yes, wait for it again. A family business plan. It is brilliant. She is brilliant. So grab your well-being journal, because you're going to want to write a lot of notes when it comes down to this session. She will help you with your sanity and also gain solutions. So let's dive in. I'm so excited to be able to talk with you today. And Danielle, we're going to get right into this conversation. And I am so excited about all things you, from your podcast to all the great work that you're doing. And so one of the things I really value is that part of your platform and your messaging is talking about unlearning parenting. I have to ask, what is unlearning parenting?
Yeah. So when we go into parenting, we don't know what we're signing up for, right? Like you don't know what you don't know until you learn it and you're in it. And so we're all the best parents before we have kids, and we can all agree on that. But what we don't realize is you come into parenting with a lot of instincts that is the way that you were wired and how you were conditioned to see the world and be able to respond and interpret to other people's behavior based on how you were parented. And a lot of that is kind of at a subconscious level, because the first 7 years of life is very much like you're just downloading software with no filter to run on autopilot the rest of your life. And when you become a parent, that's when some things come to the surface consciously, because you start to hear yourself and realize, oh my gosh, I'm turning into my mom by saying the whole "because I said so" thing. Or you just start to really realize how you have a temper that you did not know you had. And this behavior bothers me so much. I don't know why. And there's other things that you run into, like if you're parenting with a partner, where that partner has a completely different framework of wiring and conditioning. And so they're responding to things in a different way than you are. And you're kind of undermining each other, or the behavior is kind of putting a wedge of divide in between you from being a united front. And it all trickles back to how they were parented versus how you were parented, and how you've kind of made sense of a lot of that to know how that's going to inform your perspective and your approaches in the moment. And a lot of that has to happen kind of outside of parenting in the moment. You have to be able to kind of hit pause and zoom out. But that's very hard to do when every day is just winging it one day after the next. And it's just a constant barrage of things to do as a parent, especially now in a pandemic and all of the added challenges. So that's kind of unlearning parenting in a nutshell.
Well, I say this, it's like I love what you shared in regards to unlearning parenting, because when you made the statement of, hearing your parents in you, next thing you know, you're like, did I just say that? Do I sound like my mother, or do I sound like, my father? And so you talked about the fact of bringing in some of those things that you've been conditioned to do, right? So how do you go about kind of shaking it in regards to, valuing the things that really served for your parents, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
also thinking about, how can I authentically now have my own voice as a parent too?
Yeah, it's such powerful work, but it is work. It is
It's-
not easy. Let alone all of like the diapers and the up all night. Like that is hard in and of itself. And then this mental load, this emotional load on the other side is very demanding as well. And what that looks like is initially you may have some conversations with your partner or just by yourself that say, hey, my parents kind of handled this behavior in this way. I'm going to choose to do differently. I don't think that that was the best approach, or maybe there's been more research that shows that that's not effective, thinking of spanking or something like that as an example. And then start there and say, okay, our stance is now officially, anything but spanking. And then you continue to kind of move forward with what is the default and start to realize what's working and what's not working for the child that's in front of you. Because ultimately, if you as mom have plan A, dad has plan B, you need plan C. You need the thing that's going to work for the child that's in front of you and their personality and the way that they're wired in the world that they're living in. And then whatever you figure out for that first kid, you have to like start from scratch for the second, because all of it doesn't work or apply anymore. And it's so much learning and so much like being a student of your child, so that you are coming to them with a curious lens and being able to find more gray space. It's not just black and white, they're acting good or they're acting bad, or they need a consequence or they need a reward. It's so much more complicated because parenting is a relationship. It's an intimate relationship filled with a lot of conflict. And in the same way that is our marriages or, any other loving relationship. And it takes being vulnerable and realizing what side of the relationship you're responsible for, what's worth your energy to control, and then how to really give them the tools they need or the benefit of the doubt to thrive within the context of your relationship. And that parent-child relationship is tough, man.
Well, it's interesting as you as Danielle is speaking, and one of the things I love is when I record my podcast, I love Zoom because I have a chance to be able to see, and I'm loving being able to see Danielle, and as she's probably looking at me, and when she said being a student of your child, my eyes started to like shine, because that is so important, right? In terms of understanding, being curious, as you just mentioned. So when you're looking at your child or your children, and you're thinking about how to cultivate being a student of your children, what does that look like? And along the way, what do you take in terms of those practices, and in terms of how to grow throughout?
Yeah. And I love parents that are willing to have this conversation and that are challenging a lot of the ways that maybe they were raised that don't feel right to them or that aren't working for their child, and are able to be vulnerable and say, I need help with parenting. I don't know what I'm doing because this isn't working and I don't know what else to do. And it's such a hard place to be because we societally, we feel like we should have it all together. We feel like we should know exactly what we're doing. And it's very hard to ask for help with parenting. So much of it is a perspective piece that you can't take on a new belief unless you have something to replace it with. And so you may realize, okay, like putting this kid in timeout is doing absolutely nothing. But that's what I was raised with. That's the only tool my parents used. So what do I do instead? And how do I know that it's going to work or that it's going to be good for them? Because ultimately, every parent wants what's best for their kids. Every parent wants a better future for their kids than they have. Every parent is doing the very best they can with the understanding that they have and the capacity and the tools they have in their toolkit. And so to realize that you might just need more tools, or there might be something that you're missing. You just may not be understanding what's going on in your child's head when you're just so hard to get through to. But knowing that there is a reason for what's going on with them, that's not just that they're an evil villain out to destroy your life. you know like, it's just realizing that a lot of human behavior comes down to, it's either a reaction to their perception of being attacked, or that their core needs are just not being met. They're either hangry, or they're exhausted, or they don't know where their next meal is coming from, or they are, feeling unsafe in some way. That's going to affect their behavior. It's not just always a moral issue of, do I know if it's wrong or right to hit someone? Like, there is teaching. That's what discipline means. Discipline means to teach, from the Latin word. But there's so much more that goes into that relationship that sets them up for success, knowing that they're a complex human being that's having their own view of life, that is kind of interpreting the interactions and coming to conclusions, and then deciding how to act based on that, and being able to kind of like have a translator. That's kind of how I see myself, as I translate, okay, this behavior is trying to say this message in the way that you would say it back to them. That's clearly, showing them that they can trust you, and also sharing a firm expectation looks like this. And here's how you can kind of cultivate that cooperation moving forward without relying on all of these external motivators that are only a temporary fix ultimately, because there's deeper things going on. Maybe they don't feel in control of their life. Maybe they don't feel like, you have spent a lot of face-to-face time with them because you have a new sibling in the house. Or maybe there's just an overall kind of culture of chaos, and they don't know how to ask for and initiate reassurance. So they're going to do that by acting out. There's always a reason behind that behavior. And once you can kind of decode that, and you may need just added perspective to do that, then you can realize what's really going on here and find ways to effectively fill in the gaps that feel good for both of you.
I love that, what you just shared, Danielle. I'm being a translator. That is so important in terms of, you know, uh, uh, granted, yes, in terms of being a parent, but I would think that's also important in regards to just the human condition, right? Is
Mhm.
understanding the level of how you're sharing information and how the person is receiving it, and then kind of collecting that intel, so to speak, to be able to really kind of grow and strengthen the relationship. I love that in regards to, serving as a translator. So,
Mhm.
but before we get to becoming a translator, right, we may, as you mentioned, you're going through the dynamics of conditioning and thinking about how your parents raised you, and then, kind of creating your own in
Mhm.
regards to your own, dynamics as it relates to parenting. What do you say for a listener who is with us right now, who's a new parent, and they're trying to figure out, how to kind of embrace mistakes, right? And
Mm.
and how do you kind of give yourself grace when you're kind of going through those motions?
Yes, yes. And there's so much of that we set up our perspective for our kids by how we respond to mistakes, and how we treat failure, and how we really live that out through our own example. That becomes how our kids begin to treat themselves or see those situations. And so it's a lot of pressure to feel like you have to be learning these lessons, to then turn around and teach these lessons, and have these big concepts like boundaries and, self-care, and knowing what to say in all of these social situations, and having emotional intelligence, maybe things that you were never taught when you were little. now feeling like you have to master them so you can turn around and be Yoda for your child. That's not actually how it works. Like, you don't come to a level of full enlightenment and then you're allowed to have children and then you like pass it all on. That's not how it works. It
What
is
a
much
process,
more
wouldn't it be?
right. It is so much more that you embark on this journey by choosing to have kids, and then they are your mirror, and they end up revealing a whole lot more about yourself that you did not realize, and you get to choose to learn alongside them as you go and find ways to have your kids not only take on your strengths but learn from your weaknesses when you are working on them and living that out loud in real time. And we have the potential to teach from both of those places. And when we can be someone who's trustworthy, someone who's vulnerable and authentic and able to apologize to our kids and be the first to admit when we mess up, but also being able to have the self-compassion that says, tomorrow I'll do better. And next time, this is what we're going to strive for, both for yourself and your own behavior, but also for your kids to be able to say, hey, you're just a good kid that's struggling with this one thing. How can we problem solve to be able to set you up for success next time? What will that look like? What do we, how would we love for that to go down next time? And just always having kind of that growth mindset that says, when we keep trying, we'll do better. And failure's on that path towards that success. And you don't have to have perfection as your goal. It's just not attainable. It's not helpful for your kids. They would much rather know that you're human.
Absolutely. I love that. Don't try to strive for perfection in terms of your goal, which can be so hard for us as a human being, right? Because we strive so much to do things in such a, quote, perfect way, but then we have to kind of embrace our imperfections. And I love how you are embracing and you're empowering your community to embrace that in terms of unlearning parenting, which I adore. Another thing that I really treasure that you share, you talked about your kids can be a mirror. How have your kids, how have you noticed that with your family in terms of being that mirror for you?
Yes, I have two daughters. They are 7 and 8. And for us, it feels like the DNA was split down the middle. So my first daughter is 100% me, and my second daughter is 100% my husband.
Wow.
And there is like nothing that differs. Like their personalities, their preferences, their birth order, all of it is just like by the book us. And so while in some ways it's really cute and great, in a lot of other ways it's very revealing, because we get to basically watch what we were like at that age, and it rubs up against our personalities in the same ways that we are stubborn, or in the same ways that we are very strong-headed in some things. Then of course we're going to butt heads when it comes to what movie we're choosing, or how a certain day goes. And we realized that very early on, but that still is a challenge, where it's easier for me to respond to my second daughter and her really big emotional roller coasters of high highs and low lows. And I can empathize and I can stay calm with her better than my husband can, because for him it's a lot more triggering, and he just he doesn't understand it, and he gets very confused and wants to just use logic, and like has a really hard time with her when she's in that state. And for me, it's like the opposites attract mentality, where I get it and I can kind of step in and I can be there for her. But then vice versa, he's more able to relate with my older daughter when she's really trying to like lay out a whole debate about why she shouldn't need to eat whatever he made for dinner or whatever that is. And, meet her there in that and kind of see where she's coming from. Where for me, I just instantly get frustrated. And I'm like, well, this is just the way that needs to happen. And so to be able to step back and add more perspective to say, like, I want to really, ultimately, I want to treat her the way that I wanted to have been treated as a kid. And I don't want her to take on the same type of assumptions of maybe feeling like she's too much, or feeling like she just needs to, fall into line, and knowing that she does know herself better than us as she gets older, and that she just needs to listen to that voice inside her that is very leadership driven, and that's great. And the more that I've been able to find that and embrace that in my own personality, then I can turn around and do that for her, even though it's still hard, because ultimately I need you just to eat the food or get your shoes on or, go to bed.
I said when you were talking, I was like, and I said that when you were talking about, so she having that empathetic approach so she knows that she's not too much. And I said, wow, that's really powerful, right? Because,
Hmm.
our actions can really speak to how an individual feels, especially our children, right? And so it's
Mm.
so important to be able to think about having that heightened level of empathy in regards to allowing her to, just like you're giving yourself grace throughout the process of parenting, and
Hmm.
giving herself the opportunity to feel safe to continue to grow and to really
Yes.
step into herself. I love that. I
Yes. And I
love
don't
that.
do it perfectly. I mess it up. Like I get exasperated because she's asking me for like the 11th time today if I can text a friend's parent, to go on this play date that she really wants to go on. I get exasperated. I am a human being. I get frustrated. I have, only so much energy and capacity, but then I do want to recognize that when I have messed up and turn around and tell her that I'm just having a hard time. I'm feeling tired today. This has nothing to do with you. I love that you want to go on this play date. It was a great idea. We're gonna make it happen. I'm just I need a break. I'm gonna go take some time to myself and let her know that that is, trying to pull that perception away from her of making those assumptions about herself and instead just seeing the circumstances for what they are. But it's so hard to do that when we're always telling ourselves a story. All the time, our brain just wants to fill in the gaps and make it make sense. And as a parent, you do that so often with your child's behavior, where you tend to play it out, and because this is never getting better, they're a terrible kid, they're going to end up in juvie one day, and this is all my fault because I'm a terrible parent. And then of course you're going to have a hard time staying calm because your brain is reacting to them going to juvie rather than them crying about the granola bar. That's what's actually happening. And so knowing that the mindset piece of parenting is a huge part of it that is underrated. It's about the parent because it's called parenting. It's not called about the child because it's not called childing. There's so much of our baggage, our history, our mindset, our mental load, our capacity, our patience level that has a lot more to do with how things go down in the moment than it is of how our child's doing as a 3-year-old, because we're probably reacting differently to them, whether it's Tuesday at 4 p.m. or versus Saturday at 9 a.m. It's the same behavior, and we're reacting totally differently because it's all our stuff.
I see. I love that because I think it's so important for us to talk about messy, right? Because life gets
Hmm.
messy, right?
Hmm.
But I think sometimes as human beings, when we are, especially living in the world that we live in now, I love social media. Let me just reference that. I love it. But then, there could be a comparison, and we can look into
Oh
people's
yeah.
lives and we could say, oh my gosh, oh, everything seems so perfect. But
Hmm.
it's the messiness that allows us, I think, to understand how human we are, and for us to kind of literally not just go. I don't like saying go through, I like saying grow through, kind of
Mm.
grow through that process. And I love what you're sharing in regards to the lessons that you're giving in terms of your daughters. You talked about earlier your husband and how you guys kind of balance each other out. I'm loving the
Hmm.
fact that your one daughter is 100% all Danielle, and the other daughter is 100% your husband, right?
Yes.
How do you guys, in terms of as a family, how do you go about balancing all the great work that you're doing, right, as a parent, and then all of the work that you're doing as relates to being a parent in itself?
Yeah. And that's an ongoing journey because for us, our marriage has been full of ups and downs. We have been together almost 20 years now. We're high school
Oh,
sweethearts.
oh my
Yeah,
That is
we were like long
beautiful.
distance for years in college. We got married once we had both graduated college, and it has never been easy. It has never been picturesque, like what you imagine your life to be. We had some highs and some lows, and he ended up having a really hard time struggling as a functioning alcoholic for a while. And so we had to really work on things. He's 4 years sober now, so we
Yes.
can celebrate that.
Yay.
But I mean, he has a completely different software that he runs on than I do, and we are very classic when it comes to like an optimist versus a pessimist. And me being a spontaneous extrovert and him being much more a thoughtful, observant, scientist introvert. And so while that pays off in a lot of ways that we balance each other out, it also, creates a big divide in how we see our kids and how we're responding to them and how we maybe are able to stay calm, or if we need to tap out, like being able to have a shared language for that, being able to know what we're developmentally appropriate to expect at this age, and like kind of agreeing on that line, but then also having tools of how we handle some of these things and the way that we want to hold each other accountable by having code words that say like, hey, I think you need to tap out right now. Why don't you go check? Did we get a package? Why don't you go check? And then being able to like check out in the moment where I can tap in and handle some more of the emotions, or whatever needs to happen. But ultimately knowing we want the same things for our kids. And all parenting partners do. It's just I have a different life experience that allows me to kind of see a different path to that success than you do. And neither one of them are wrong, but if we don't ever talk about them or put them on paper and actually feel like we're clear on the trajectory to get to where we want to go in 20 years of what's going to have mattered and who we want our kids to be and what's going to be true of their life, then we're not sure which battles to pick. And we're not sure when it's a big deal versus a small deal, and when we really need to be addressing a certain problem, or when we can just like let that one go as water under the bridge. And that's a constant conversation, but we got clear on our family's core values, and we know which things are non-negotiables that we're spending our time and money on. And it doesn't mean that it's not easy, but we have really committed to a certain situation of schooling for our kids, or who is a part of our parenting conversations, and what role family plays in some of that. And just knowing that we have some of those conversations hashed out allows us to continue to work together day in and day out to say, hey, I'm concerned about this behavior. Is this going off the tracks? Is this getting worse? So like, what's your thoughts? And then being able to say like, oh, actually, I think that's because she's not been getting a lot of sleep lately, or it's because of this new thing at school, or maybe this daughter has a presentation coming up. How can we practice this with her to like make sure that she has a good mindset about it, that she's learning some more coping skills? And we just try to bounce those ideas off each other, knowing that if we mess up in the moment, if we aren't handling things well, we can still talk about it and have each other's back.
I love that. I love the fact that, first off, that so much in terms of your family element in regards to both working with your husband, your spouse, right, is it's the same on terms of a dynamic in terms of your relationship with your daughters, is the value of
Mm-hmm.
communication and
Mm-hmm.
the understanding in terms of communication. And then what I also love so much is when you talked about earlier in terms of the whole, being a good translator, it speaks to all levels of family, right? Because
Oh
it
yeah.
speaks to your daughters and it speaks to your husband. And I love the fact that you've incorporated so much in terms of the value of being good in terms of interpersonal communication, and then also being great as it relates to serving as kind of a great active listener to kind of learn, to kind of be able to translate and to be able to interpret. I also
Yes.
I value that you talked about core values. I'm curious, what are the core values in your family, and how did you go about constructing them?
Yeah, that's actually something that came from the process of when I was writing the business plan for my company, because I was working through all these prompts and writing these things down and coming up with a mission statement. And I had the thought of, why don't we take this level of intentionality and bring it home? Because so much of what we're doing is the leadership of people, which is like the highest, influence in a leadership position. And what if we had clear communication and regular check-ins and things that kind of held us accountable with a lot of that shared language? And, what would that look like to have parenting partners do a similar process? So I came up with this idea of writing a family business plan where you essentially write out your end goals, identify your core values, come up with your family's identity of how you spend your time and money, and get clear about your culture, like the intentional culture you're striving for in your home, and then write a mission statement that kind of sums it all up. And so I did that with my husband originally, and I ended up cheating a little bit. I found some canvases from Etsy.
Yeah.
And I just loved the messaging that they used. And so we stole it and we made it our family values. But it's because I really recommend something that is memorable, that your kids could repeat, that you could use on a day-to-day basis. And so having it on your wall makes sense to make it a conversation topic and make it bleed into the ways that you're parenting day to day. And so for us, that ended up being, be brave, be kind, be you, be wise, be happy, be true. And each one of those has its own definition. And we really just try to give those reminders on a day-to-day basis of, hey, remember, in our family, we cheer each other on, or like in our family, we teach our taste buds, or in our family, we really value, learning and continuing to try again. And you just, like having some of these lines that start with that phrase, in our family, we blank, creates a lot of clarity in your expectations, but it also holds everybody in the family accountable. It's not just rules for the kids, it's rules for all of us that we're working on and working towards. And it allows you to feel like you have the shared language to create the sense of belonging that's really, foundational within a home. And having the tools and the conversations to really get clear about that allows you to teach that in a really practical way. Because we all want our kids to be great people, but if we're just saying, I just want a good human being that contributes to society, then it just feels like you're throwing spaghetti at a wall. And instead, getting really clear about like, oh yeah, in our family, being really open-minded is a huge part of being kind to us. And so we're going to choose to have our kids, start this extracurricular activity or go on this trip or do the thing. You can make those decisions based off of that place of that value system and know that you're doing the right thing, because there's ultimately a million things you can do, and it's very confusing without a plan.
I love that. It's interesting because I'm trying not to interrupt Danielle when she's sharing information because, usually when that happens, Danielle, is because I'm getting too excited and I need to, and I'm trying to control all emotions, and it's very challenging for me sometimes. But when you're like, a business plan for our family, like a culture, a mission statement. Like these are things that, of course, we think about a company, an organization, but it's so important as it relates to, I love that in regards to crafting it for your family and being able to make that this incredible, really this incredible collaboration with your partner in regards to the culture, in regards to those core values, and then also sharing that message where it's more specific than it's like, okay, yes, we want to have, we want to be able to raise, good kids or kids that are valuing the world, right? Or and thinking about the world. But then it's so important to talk about what those specifics are in regards to what that can look like for themselves, and then also as it relates to what that looks like for you, as a unit. I think that is just incredible. So as soon as you started sharing that, I got way too excited, and I was like, because I'm thinking to myself, this is so powerful, and it's such a great way to be able to kind of replicate along the way. So tell us what. I'm so curious in regards to the fact that all the work that you're doing, because I love what you're sharing with your community. I love that you are talking about how messy things can be and how we should embrace that. How did that get started for you? Why was it so important for you to be able to create this community and your company in regards to really helping to serve parents?
I love that. I had a teaching certification originally, and I was working at a school called Educare. It was a Head Start, early Head Start program. And then I got the opportunity to work for Save the Children and do home visiting. And while I was home visiting, I realized that what happens at school is great, but what happens at home is what's really wiring kids. And parenting is so influential, but parents are doing a hard job with not a lot of tools, not a lot of support, no village, no black and white guarantees. And I just got to be welcomed into these families' home for an hour every single week and hear their stories and know their struggles and see just how much they cared about their kids and how well intentioned they were, and they just needed to be able to have more books to read with them or understand developmentally what's appropriate for a 2-year-old, and that all kids have tantrums. Just sharing information like that was so helpful for them to know that they're not alone and that their kid needs them and looks up to them. And, in that insecurity, that imposter syndrome affects all parents, no matter how much of a background you have, because, I was the world's greatest teacher in my mind and thought parenting was going to be a snap. And then as soon as I had my second daughter, I realized that she was going to teach me everything I needed to know, because the strong-willed kids, their personality is one that doesn't show up as much at school or for other authority figures. They kind of really hold it together and then they fall apart at home. And that is a very hard dynamic as a parent, because you start to take it personally. It's very hard to deal with those tumultuous ups and downs and feel like you have, a kiddo that's either unpredictable or you have to walk on eggshells or you don't want to upset. And realizing that that was the whole world that I didn't realize, was happening when I was a teacher, gave me so much compassion for parents really feeling like they're the ones having a hard time or ruining their kids or, whatever that guilt looked like. I ended up doing a survey after I had started my company, and I asked, what is, something that keeps you up at night as a parent? What are the things that are your fears? And I thought the answer would be more like, something's going to happen to my child that I can't, stop, or, something medically, or, an accident or something like that. And for the most part, the resounding answer was, I feel like I'm failing. I feel like I'm screwing up my kids. I feel like I'm causing them damage because I have a hot temper, and or like I just feel so guilty, and I'm not living up to my own expectations, society's expectations. I'm not doing anything right. And this was an anonymous survey, and so then of course they also would say, but also I'm the only one, or but I also feel really alone in this feeling. And so I knew I needed to talk about this more and make this much more of a conversation topic and take away that stigma that you feel that you're the only one struggling, or that you should know how to do this naturally and you shouldn't have to ask for help to know how to parent your tough kiddo that just has all the big emotions. And so that's where I started my podcast, which is called Failing Motherhood. And I interview experts and other moms that right off the bat say, this is how I feel like I'm failing motherhood, and then be able to share the ways that they've either found self-compassion or grown, or learned more perspective, and how asking for help or getting other resources has really benefited them. And my hope is that when moms hear that and they know that they're not alone, they're able to have a lot more compassion and move forward with hope and with answers that they wouldn't have been able to find the time to seek out before, or feel worthy of seeking out before. And I just feel like shame and judgment doesn't benefit anyone. Like the more that you beat yourself up, it's not serving your child, it's not serving you, and it's not solving any of the problems. So if we can normalize that feeling and talk about it, then we can find the next steps that are going to be right for you.
I love that in terms of, really being able to kind of take the shame out, right? Talking about it more, being able
Mhm.
to create this community that's going to serve, as a really great supporter throughout the entire experience. And then I also really value and treasure that reached out to your community to find out exactly, how they felt. And so I'm so curious because, guys, her podcast is amazing. And we will have that information right on this episode page, representing, Danielle's a podcast episode for the Courting Happiness podcast. So I'm curious in regards to those transformative stories, the stories where, people in your community have grown so much. Can you tell us a little bit about some of them that might that you're really proud of, that kind of make your eyes sparkle when you when you think about them?
Yeah, yeah. I just actually before this call got done recording an episode with someone that was a listener, and she had reached out a couple months ago just saying how much she appreciated the podcast and how much she had benefited from it. And so we scheduled a Zoom, and I heard more of her story, and I was like, "You need to be on the podcast." And she was willing to record an episode. And for her, her story is just one of so much hardship, dealing with domestic violence, dealing with abuse of one of her kids, and just finding so much of a mental health journey, mental illness in her struggle, and finally being able to find a road to medication that she found that benefited her in such a huge transformational way that now allows her to turn around and say, like, you can live. I didn't even realize I wasn't living. I was just surviving for so many years. And now I know that it's possible to when I prioritize myself, when I take care of my well-being, when I am able to value my own needs, not only is there no guilt for that, but I can find so like my kids benefit so much when I'm able to do that. And for her to be able to speak to now, turning around to share that with other moms and say, here's what I wish I would have known. Here's what that looked like for me. And here's the hope that's possible. And yes, I still struggle and have a lot of fears for the future, or a lot of concerns for how, like, why couldn't I, why shouldn't, I should have, and, be wrapped up in all of these coulda, woulda, shouldas. But, today I know that I'm the parent that my kids need because I am here. I am still here, and I have chosen them, and I fight tooth and nail every day to be a person they can trust and make them feel safe, and, not like, that's okay if I wasn't able to do that before. And just having her speak to that in her own story, I think is really powerful, because we only cross paths because of the podcast. And I just love the power of the internet and social media for that in this day and age.
I really love that too. One of the things that I really treasure with the podcast is being able to reach and to talk and to connect with people from all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
and meet individuals like yourself, right? And we can have this really rich, incredible conversation. And so, to me, there's so much great meaning out of podcasting.
Yeah.
And I'm so curious also, because earlier I asked, as it relates to your husband, and how you two kind of balance it all in terms of, your family and work. But I'm curious, for those who are listening, who are moms, and who are, new mothers, or new parents, not trying to exclude any of the men out there who are
Mm-hmm.
listening. um we're very inclusive
Uh-huh.
podcast. But I'm curious, as it relates to you as a woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about balancing your podcast, your business, your community, and all things family?
Yeah. I mean, that is the question, right? Like, how do you have it all? and
As I'm
and I
shaking
think,
my head, yes, like,
yep.
yes, how is that even? How do you do it?
And especially in a pandemic world, like, nothing is a sure thing. Childcare, if it was there, was, completely now uncertain. And it makes I think it's a great time for families everywhere to be questioning the way that they're living and if it is aligned with their values and if they are spending the amount of time with their kids that they want to be, and kind of like, what is it all for? Because you never know, what is years down the road, and are we preparing our kids for the future that, is coming, and just things are changing at such a rapid pace. I know that I got off the phone with a family earlier today where the mom is ending her career as a lawyer because she's just like, for the last 2 years, I don't feel like I have given my child what he needs, and I have not, been able to prioritize him. And she also, had a breast cancer diagnosis and, all these other things not making that possible. But for her, she's just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, he needs more of me, and I want to be able to give it to him because he's only 3 and we don't get this time back. And so anyway, the long story is, for me, what I knew with all the uncertainty is I wanted to be able to be home if and when school went out, at any random day basis, and I'd be able to pick up my kids and drop them off and spend more time as a family. And so for me, that looked like the hustle of entrepreneurship and spending a lot of late nights, working on my business and trying to shove it all into the school day so that we can do what we need to do on the weekend. But that's not always possible. I work Saturday mornings. I see a lot of clients in the evenings when their kids are in bed. So, I'm on Zoom until 10 p.m. a lot of nights. But it really is an ebb and flow of, in this season, what does it look like and what do I feel good about? And you're not going to have it all. Like, I don't go to the gym every single day. I don't have, girls' nights with my friends every week. But for me, we have a lot of home cooked meals and dinners as a family. And we, really prioritize both of us not having careers that travel so that we're not burnt out, so that we have more to give our kids. And we make a lot of effort putting our finances towards a private education for our kids in a Montessori that I feel really aligned with for the early childhood years, because that to me is their college tuition. Like that, hands down, it's much more influential than whatever they'll end up doing 15 years from now. That's why we have made a lot of changes in our life and sold our house and done a lot of things to make that happen. And that's not what I recommend for other families. Every family has a completely different balance of what those priorities look like and what feels right for them in each season. But just, prodding yourself to ask those questions and feel okay with kind of going against the grain or challenging, like, is this just really, what the best fit is for us, or based on this kid's needs, are we doing what we can to set them up for success, but also have a life, like, it's just hard. It's hard. So I don't know if I answered your question at all.
You did answer it. And what's so interesting, as you're talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I am a product of a Montessori education. And I feel like, and I feel like it's guided me my entire life in terms of, the level of freedom, the level of making decisions, the level of going through certain, the processing. And it's so funny because when I look back on some of my, my pictures that my parents took of me when I was in Montessori school, and just thinking outside of the box, one day we went to class and we were at a mall. Now, of course, I'm like so small, I barely remember those things, but I remember like literally they took the class to the mall and they created this, dynamic within the mall setting. And I thought to myself, wow, how out of the box is that? So I think it's wonderful that you are, sharing these experiences and giving your kids this opportunity for that level of learning in terms of really being able to have, I like to call it levels of freedom in terms of, just really being able to build and grow that way. I'm also curious about this, and because I hate wrapping up our conversation because I'm really enjoying talking to you, Danielle. And for those of you listening, once again, make sure that you listen in and subscribe and share her podcast. And she is just simply phenomenal. I'm curious as it relates to this. How do you go about, because the Courting Happiness podcast is all about being able to kind of commit right, to your well-being or to your happiness. How do you commit to your well-being and happiness?
Like on a personal level.
Yeah, how are you able to do that, especially on a personal level with all of the hats,
Mm-hmm.
that you wear, right? Because as I just mentioned earlier, in terms of the balancing act that you do, right? And from your business, podcast, your community, your family, your children, I'm curious in regards to how do you go about committing to your, well-being, your self-care, as a woman that holds so many different hats or titles, so to speak, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
how do you do that?
Yeah, I feel like I have to be a good example of following through on what I preach. Because if I'm constantly saying, that moms need to prioritize their own self-care, if they need to not feel guilty, then I have to swallow that pill myself. and and that was a process that I feel like I was able to work through when I sought out a support group when my husband was really struggling with his alcoholism. And it was called Al-Anon, the support group for family members of alcoholics. And really, it's just a class on how to be an adult. Like, I feel like I learned for the first time what actual boundaries looked like and why it was so important to focus on the things that you can control and put your energy there and be able to, not completely worry about all the circumstances and all of these people that you can't control, but challenge yourself to say, well, what can I do about it? Or how am I taking care of myself? And how am I doing the best things that make me feel good today, and being okay with finding little things that bring joy, or being grateful and finding gratitude in hard times, and just being able to work through some of that. Being taught it for the first time now allows me to have a completely different lens of how that applies to parenting, how that applies to my family now, and knowing that there is a little bit of that conviction that has to happen when you feel really like you're just surrendering to the circumstances, like there's nothing you can change, like your kids are just, they never listen, and your partner never does anything around the house, and it's just, poor me, I guess there's nothing to do about it, like we can just live, be miserable. And that's really not true. There you may not be able to change your partner, and they may not, sign up for parent coaching with you, and your kids may still struggle in some areas, but there's a lot that you can take control of to change, because especially in those relationships and for your own capacity. And it comes down to very small decisions about, like, I'm going to take this time away and do some journaling, or I'm going to pop in a short yoga video because it's going to rejuvenate me, or I'm going to drive without music on because I need some silence, or I need to be able to just tune into what your own needs are and meet them like you would your kids. Like, if they need a snack, if they need to take a nap, you take care of them in the same way. I try to treat myself like another person in the family with needs, and know that mine are just as important. Not that I ignore everyone else or that I, trump everyone else, but there's a balance. And, I have a voice at the table too. And it's okay for me to speak up and say, hey, like, I don't have the capacity to do this today, or I am really getting bothered by this certain situation. I need more help, for the mornings. Or I recently asked my husband, I need you to take over more of the school pickups so that I can schedule some later, Zoom meetings. And what will that look like? How do we make that happen? And I don't feel guilty for that, because we're trying to each find a way that we, strive to find that balance with our family. And it's going to give me more mental space when I can then clock out of work and be present with the kids, having gotten that done. And that's okay to ask for those things. But yeah, it still is inevitably, there's good days and there's maybe not as good days. I tend to forget to eat meals sometimes when I'm just working. Like, I've had 3 hours of back-to-back meetings just now, and I probably should eat some things. I only had coffee today, but you win some, you lose some.
it's a process, right?
Yes.
But what I love so much about what you're sharing is it's about giving yourself grace throughout the process, practicing
Yes.
self-compassion throughout the process. And then also the value of asking for help
Hmm.
and having that level of communication with your partner of being able to share, hey, I think I'm going to need some help with this, or can you kind of take on more carpool so I can have more time in terms of your meetings. And I love that you shared that, because I think sometimes as human beings, and even sometimes as women, I think when we think about all that we're carrying and we think, oh, I can do it, I can
Hmm.
just add one more thing. But you have to also think about, okay, your well-being. What is that going to
Hmm.
mean to your well-being? And I love the fact that I feel like you've given us this great permission slip in terms
Yes.
of really being able to embrace the process and to
Yes.
be able to embrace, all things you, and being able to ask for help along the way. So, as I
Yes.
mentioned earlier, like your incredible podcast, you guys definitely make sure that you are sharing and subscribing. Failing Motherhood. I really enjoy listening to your podcast,
Thank
Danielle.
you.
You're really phenomenal. Where can our audience find you? So we talked about your podcast. Where else can they find you on what you and I love in terms of all things social media and the internet, right? So where can they find you there?
Yes. Yes. I am most active on Instagram. So I am at parent_wholeheartedly. Come find me there. Come say hi. And in my link in my bio is, everything that you can find from me freebie wise. But my website is parentingwholeheartedly.com. And once there, you can find the ways to work with me. I have both a group where it's an 11-week crash course in community for moms striving to parent their strong-willed kids with way more patience. And so there's another one starting up early 2022. And then I have one-on-one coaching as well for parenting partners that are really wanting to write that family business plan and find more patience and improve their kiddos' behavior, and just get a whole new toolkit of tools to use when they've unlearned the parenting that it's not working. So you can find that at parentingwholeheartedly.com/coaching. And I have a free masterclass that you can watch with no obligation, on demand at any time. And that's parentingwholeheartedly.com/masterclass.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for all of that. I mean, and all that information that you just shared will also be on Danielle's podcast show notes page of this show. So everything that all the wonderful, information from her, in terms of her website, where you can find her on social media. And then also, I'm so glad that you shared some of your information in regards to freebies, because, I'm one of those people. I love freebies. I love I love seeing, I love being able to learn more. And then I also love being able to see what other resources there are out there. Danielle,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being a phenomenal person and resource as relates to all things parenting today, as well as all things in regards to how to create your own business, as especially when you're managing family and work. And then also on top of the fact of valuing the importance of growth in terms of mindset. You are truly extraordinary.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really, really thoughtful. And I appreciate it. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
You can learn more about where to follow Danielle by visiting her episode page on the Courting Happiness podcast website at drcourtneyalston.com/podcast/episode 56. Let's continue this conversation online. Email us at podcast@drcourtneyalston.com. That's podcast at drcourtneyalston.com. Join us on Instagram at Courting Happiness. Don't forget, that's courting with a K. Also, I hope you join our private Facebook community. You can find us at Courting Happiness Podcast Community. Our private Facebook group is a safe haven to share, meet more people looking to build positive relationships, focus on well-being, and create a happier life. Now, are you ready to spread happiness? We hope you subscribe and share this podcast with your family, friends, coworkers, and all the important people in your world. We release a new episode every Thursday. Congratulations on your continued commitment to your courting happiness journey. Thank you so much for listening. We want you to be well, be happier, and be kinder to yourself. We can't wait to see you next week.